Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Lewis, editor of Building Enclosure. Thanks for listening along with us today. On March 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we have a free webinar, Pitfalls and Challenges of NFPA 285 Engineering Analysis. We're joined today by our presenters, Keith Nelson, Commercial Application Leader and Fire Performance Subject Matter at DuPont, and Daniel Martin, Lead Fire Protection Engineer at Jensen Hughes. Keith and Daniel, thanks for sitting with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So to start off, can you go over what the NFPA 285 analysis involves?
It's a very loaded question.
Yes.
There are different types of analyses that you can run with NFPA 285. Obviously, any analysis that you do with NFPA 285 needs to start with a compliant tested assembly. From there, what we can do is we can get into generic engineering analyses, where what we call our build-a-wall analyses, where you have a table of compliant configurations that you can build together. You have design listing analyses like the UL directory or Intertech directory with their design listings. You also have the code evaluation report analyses, which are a third-party group like ICCES, UL, Intertech with their CCRRs. And they put together compliant assemblies that way. And then you also have the project-specific engineering analyses, where you're looking specifically at a project that's out there in the world, and you're trying to make sure that project is specific, and that usually ends up being very detail-oriented to specifically what you have. But it all goes back to being based on tested assemblies as the basis for the analysis.
Yeah, and just to Dan dove in with both feet there. Well, I would take a step back and say, why do we even need it? And just hopefully people watching this know that NFPA 285 and the limiting flame propagation on the exterior of buildings in the case of a fire is a critical issue with the built environment today. And there's lots of fires that we could point to kind of identify those risks. NFPA 285 is really working to identify that a building is safe, that we are limiting that fire flame propagation on the outside of a building. Testing is one way that we can do that. It's a very large and expensive test. And so we're often using, more often than not, compliance in the field is shown through engineering analyses, which is what we're going to be talking about, and what Dan described, the different ways to kind of get to that approved assembly.
Now, with all that being said, what are some challenges that come with this test data?
Challenges in regards to the fact that, one, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of exterior wall assemblies that you can design out there. Mixed matching materials, water resistant barriers, the exterior insulation, the base wall. Is it a steel stud, wood stud, CMU? What's your veneer like? Is it an MCM panel? Is it an EIFS system? Is it an insulated metal panel? Is it plate metal? Is it brick? Is it terracotta or cement fiberboard? So the challenge of NFPA 285, as Keith alluded to previously, was that you can't test every single combination. So the engineering analysis gives you that ability to start making those modifications to capture some of those variances that still maintain compliance. But the main challenge is coming in with good, solid data, coming in with that full 285 test. You could come in with one test. You could come in with three different tests to use as your technical justification. But if you don't have a good compliant assembly off the front, it's a no-go from an analysis standpoint. From there, you see some people that do some ad hoc testing that uses supplemental. You can do that, but if you're basing all your technical just on that supplemental, it doesn't work. I mean, there are set procedures, and I wouldn't say procedures, but there are industry standards when it comes to what we look for as a agency that writes these engineering judgments, and being part of the technical committees that work on maintaining the test standard in terms of what type of data should be going in and what type of data should not be used in terms of an analysis. So the data itself, how you achieve it and what you get from it, is very important and can be scrutinized heavily.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the biggest challenge is awareness and education on what it is and how you comply. I mean, all the stuff that Dan was just talking about. You know, building structures is a complex enterprise. This is one piece of it, and it's fairly complex all by itself. And so having enough knowledge to understand what you're looking at, as whether it's as a designer picking a wall assembly or as a code official approving a design or a contractor involved in the process as well, is understanding, does the testing and does the analysis provide enough data to ensure that our end product will be compliant? And so, I mean, really our presentation on the 20th is really going to be digging into that and understanding the difference between a tested assembly and engineering judgment, engineering analysis, what's required, and even giving some examples of good engineering analysis as well as some not so good engineering analysis and things you should be watching out for.
Speaking about compliance, I want to mention the code real quick. What are some compliance triggers in the building code when it comes to NFPA 285?
There are a lot, and they're kind of scattered all over the code.
Yeah.
Obviously, the first instance you get into NFPA 285 compliance is it's related to exterior walls. So Chapter 14 of the IBC is really your first spot where you see those triggers come into play. After that, you obviously, Chapter 14 is broken down into various sections in terms of combustible materials, water-resistant barriers, insulated metal panels now in the 24 edition, ACMs and MCM panels, EAF systems, they all break down into subcategories in Chapter 14. So that's the first place. And then also Chapter 26, which is plastics, has a fair number of NFPA 285 triggers. And then actually there's one hidden there in Chapter 15 for rooftop structures. So keep an eye out that if you're working on rooftop structures.
Yeah. I mean, the kind of simple way to look at it, I think, is if you're dealing in non-combustible or protected construction, so type 1 through 4, not type 5, you're probably going to have to deal with NFPA 285, especially if you're over 40 feet in height. But at any height, if you have foam plastic in your building exterior, which, you know, our foam plastic is often what we're using for insulations. It's often part of our cladding systems. So just, you know, I would say for generically commercial structures over 40 feet, it is something you're going to have to deal with.
Now, during the webinar, will you be going over the different types of reports that there are?
Yes, we will cover the different types of reports from the general build a wall to the code evaluation reports, and then some project specific examples. So we will be covering the multiple different types of analyses in terms of the product that you might see come across your desk if you're reviewing it or if you're trying to design it, of what you're looking at and which ones you're picking from to make sure your design is compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're gonna dig into examples, both good and bad examples of engineering analyses that may or may not be well supported. So we'll be looking at from a variety of different angles on what is involved.
Well, it feels like we covered a lot, but lastly, I do want to ask, is there anything else that attendees will learn during the webinar?
We do a little bit of the code. Especially how do engineering analysis get approved by the AHJ, the code official? How do we get into that? We also get into, like I said, we get some real world case scenarios and what me as an author of these reports put into them. So it gives you an idea of the level of detail that we get into with our engineering analyses to ensure compliance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much covers it. It's I'm really hoping that people come away from the presentation just with a better understanding of what is needed for compliance, and then ultimately how to comply and how to, again, if you're not writing these documents, but if you're needing to review them, what aspects do you need to be looking for? What makes a good analysis or one that you might want to ask some more questions about?
And then one final thing is we're also going to get into a little bit of the history of the NFPA 285 test. the lineage of that and how we've gone from an outdoor test that was 2 stories tall to an interior lab space test, and show and demonstrate that the U.S. building codes have been looking at this since the late 70s and 80s as something that needs to be addressed in the codes with actual testing.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again both for your time today.
You're welcome.
To register for this free webinar, head to continuingeducation.bmpmedia.com. Until next time, visit us on buildingclosureonline.com for your technical and educational resources.